just today, the University of Pennsylvania announced that it was going along with the Trump administration's request. They sort of struck a deal with the Department of Education that they now have to erase Lia Thomas's records, basically strike the records, and apologize to the female athletes that were involved in all of this. So just reading here from the Fox News tear sheet, they say the U.S. Department of Education announced Tuesday that the University of Pennsylvania had agreed to a resolution with the Trump administration to keep biological male trans teens out of women's sports. So that applies to the future and is obviously very important. The department previously launched an investigation into UPenn on February 6th for Title IX violations. So just a couple of weeks after Donald Trump took office, take note of that. In the swimming program, trans athlete Lia Thomas competed for the women's team in the 2021-2022 season, but we all remember that, of course. And so these are some bullet points from Fox. They have to restore to female athletes all individual UPenn Division I swimming records, titles, or similar recognitions, which were misappropriated by male athletes. They have to issue a public statement to the university community stating that it will comply with Title IX. How demoralizing, by the way, if you're in the DEI department or if you're one of the Title IX bureaucrats at the University of Pennsylvania. And they have to post the statement in a prominent location on its main website and on each of its websites for women's athletics. Clearly, the Trump administration is making an example out of the University of Pennsylvania here. I have seen some commentary saying that this is just abject cruelty to do this to Lia Thomas and other athletes. But I think it's also really important to just take note of how the Trump administration did this, which, by the way, I shouldn't even say by the way, it is the entire topic here. It was a Title IX investigation. The University of Pennsylvania flagrantly violated Title IX. Now, conservatives, before the trans ideology craze took hold, had all kinds of problems with Title IX, and now conservatives have sort of found themselves on the side of the issue where they're defending Title IX because it's something that is intended to give a boost to female athletes. Everybody knows it was a victory of the women's liberation movement, of the feminist movement, and all of a sudden it was treated like garbage because it was the Obama administration started this with what's called the Dear Colleague letter. You don't need the whole history of this, but basically it's perfectly reasonable for the Trump administration to bring a Title IX investigation against the University of Pennsylvania. They are making a very clear example of the school. So because of obviously what happened with Lia Thomas, which you will remember, one of the reasons you could, I guess, imagine the Trump administration pursuing an investigation into Title IX here is that people had to be in changing rooms with Lia Thomas. And go look up Paula Scanlon if you're not familiar with her. These are stories that got completely glossed over by the media for a really long time. The media was not covering this story accurately at the time. The media has gotten slightly better on coverage of this since realizing that the country was in such a dramatically different place than like the 10 interns from Penn and Oberlin and wherever the hell else, and that it was creating a huge trust gap, and that, hey, actually even some of our leftist friends looking around are like, not everybody's on board with this. It's so different from what I heard in my human resources meeting when everybody told me this was a matter of life and death. Guess not. So it's 2025, and the Trump administration is just completely humiliating the University of Pennsylvania, making them post their statement in a very public place and take the recognition away from people like Lia Thomas. Last point on that, it is not cruel to take away Lia Thomas's medals. It is cruel to have ever allowed Lia Thomas and other athletes to take recognition away from young women, to take scholarships away from young women. The left often likes to apply a class lens to absolutely everything. Well, a lot of needy women lost out on scholarships for half a decade because they were being beat in tournaments and all that sort of stuff by male athletes who were identifying as women. So it's one of those moments where you're frustrated because we can put Keith Olbermann up on the screen. He had a reaction where he said, wanted to congratulate Whiny Gaines on now being able to say she finished tied for fourth, not tied for fifth in the Lia Thomas race and then tagged at Riley Gaines. I wish Keith Olbermann were still important enough for me to do a Keith Olbermann impression. I forget who it was on SNL who did a great Keith Olbermann impression back in the day. I want to say it was like actually Andy Samberg or Chris Parnell. Ben Affleck, producer Steve is in my ear. It was Ben Affleck, that's right. You could Google that. It's fabulous. And unfortunately now, though, as easy as it is to mock Keith Olbermann, he's inconsequential and really doesn't matter at all. So I can't even bother doing the impression of him, which would be a 10 out of 10. As you know, no question about it. I would knock it out of the park, but he is utterly unimportant. So we're not going to do an impression of Keith Olbermann here, but we will bring up this other interesting anecdote while we're on the subject from Annie Carney of the New York Times about Sarah McBride, representative from Delaware, close to the Biden family. This is this is a little report that Annie Carney put out, I think today, saying Sarah McBride, Democrat of Delaware, and the first openly transgender member of Congress, appears to be making some progress with Republican colleagues. On the floor just now, Representative Steve Womack, Republican of Arkansas, introduced her, according to the New York Times, at the microphone as the gentlelady from Delaware. This was only the second time all year that Republicans have referred to her. Again, this is the New York Times, as a woman on the floor in hearings and on the floor. Republicans have routinely referred to her as a man. And that's true. I think Nancy Mace has made a big deal of referring to Sarah McBride as a man. My advice to members of Congress, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, I would not isolate this just to Republicans. And by the way, I shouldn't be giving advice to members of Congress because that will just get me down a long rabbit hole of things that I would advise them to do differently. But first of all, you don't have to make an issue of this at all. Have a private friendship with Sarah McBride. Be publicly respectful to Sarah McBride. Fine. But if you don't believe that Sarah McBride is a woman, Sarah McBride is also an advocate for transgenderism. Just did a pretty interesting interview. I think it was Ezra Klein in the New York Times. But this is not sort of incidental to who Sarah McBride is as a politician. Sarah McBride is a proponent of this ideology. And you do not want to validate that if you think this ideology has left behind a decade of victims. Of young girls who have suffered, for example, irreversible damage. Sarah McBride believes in a lot of those prescriptions and has pushed them, literal prescriptions and metaphorical ones for what you should do if you're experiencing or suffering from gender dysphoria. And if you're on the side of the issue that most Republicans are, honestly, probably most Democrats are at this point, you don't have to validate it. And validating it for a long time is what gave it so much power in our cultural landscape. So I wanted to touch on this because it's also easy, by the way, to swing back and end up being just completely cruel and awful and treating human beings as a meme. That is entirely possible, and nobody should be doing that. But our primary focus here should always be on the victims of this ideology who have ended up suffering much more than anyone ever needed to because they were given horrific treatment, anti-treatment, essentially, that was being heralded as treatment itself.